are in our fourth lesson on the book of Judges, and we're going to look at the first of the, well, actually the second judge, the first that we get a serious narrative about, which is Ehud. And before we get into that, just a reminder from last time, what it was that we kind of concluded and summarized from this lesson. And that is that when we look at the geography, when we look at the name places that it gives us, what we see is that Israel fails to control the key trade routes in the land. They don't get the Jezreel Valley, and they don't get the Shphelah. Okay, the Shphelah is the area that is the low hills that protect the highlands, the Judean highlands, which is where Israel has been relegated to. We also saw that marriage is an economic and political tool that Israel does with their neighbors to basically establish the ability to trade and do business and whatnot with the people around them because they don't control all of these various routes. And we saw that economic decisions have theological consequences. They worshiped other gods. And we're going to begin to see how that cycle, the decisions that they make for economic reasons, and the theological implications continue to get worse and worse. So, I wanted to show you this photo. This is the photo I used on the Save the Date, but it is without the big Save the Date. This is a photo of the Jezreel Valley, taken from the Nazareth Ridge. So Nazareth sits, there's a fairly large ridge line that sits between the Jezreel Valley and Nazareth, which is behind it. Nazareth is off the beaten path. And there's this ridge that is, actually this photo doesn't do it justice, it's quite a steep drop down to the bottom, which is why it says in the Gospels that Jesus made them so angry when he went to Nazareth that they did what? They wanted to throw him off a cliff. Well, that cliff is the Nazareth Ridge. And it's quite a long way down. But the beauty, what I really love about the Nazareth Ridge is you can get a good view of the Jezreel Valley. Notice how flat that plain is, all that green area below it. And you'll notice off to the left, there's a little haystack-looking hill. That is Mount Tabor. We will see Mount Tabor next week with our next judge. And then a little bit more towards the middle right is Mount Moreh, or the Hill of Moreh. And behind that, in the haze in the distance, is Mount Gilboa. And between those two mounts, there's a small pass that runs down to a place called Beit Shan. So when Saul and the Philistines do battle, they're battling for the Jezreel Valley. The Philistines are camped at Mount Moreh. The Israelites are camped on Mount Gilboa. The battle takes place in between. Saul and Jonathan are killed, and they are hung on the walls of Beit Shan. So all of this is in the Jezreel Valley, and this is only about a third of it we're looking at in this photo. If I did a panorama to the other side, you could see Megiddo, you could see Mount Carmel, where the prophets of Baal and Elijah do battle. All of this takes place in this big flat plain of the Jezreel Valley. This is the area that Israelites fail to control. Now, let's turn to Ehud. What is it that you remember from the story of Ehud? What do you recall?
He's left-handed.
Oh, he's left-handed. Okay. All right. He's one of the few and the proud. All right. Yep. Okay. What else? Sly. Why do you say he's sly?
I think he had a sense of what he was going to do, and so he, hey, I'm going to give you this gift and slave.
Okay. What else do we know about him?
We always think the story that how they killed the guy with the sword.
Okay, kills him with a sword. And what's the sort of the fun?
What comes out of the guy is pretty sneaky.
Well, okay, it's just that, and also it's what happens. Is the sword visible anymore after he's done? Sticks it so far in that the fat covers him, right? Okay, yeah. So if you had to characterize Ehud as some type of a person, it doesn't have to be a named person, but a type of a person from the way that he does what he does, how would you classify Ehud?
Out of shape.
Out of shape? Is Ehud out of shape, or is
Oh, he doesn't have
Eglon is out of shape? Okay.
A hobbit,
A hobbit? Why do you say that?
just small and aggressive, or maybe I'm like the guys that were in the
Dwarf? Oh, okay, interesting. Okay.
Let's call them psycho.
A psychopath. Oh, that's interesting. That's not what I would have thought of. Okay, interesting. Anybody else? Sometimes I've heard it compared to a ninja. Okay, because he makes this daring escape from the palace. After he kills him, it's like he's a spy going in and doing these crazy stunts, right? They kill guys, or an assassin, right? That's sneaky. And I want to look at the story and determine if that's really what's happening, or maybe there's something else going on that perhaps we miss. So, before we jump into it, we got to do a little background that's relevant to this story. So this is from the book of Joshua, and this is the account of where the Israelites are entering the promised land for the first time. And it says, when the entire nation had finished crossing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Select 12 men from the people, one from each tribe, and command them. Take 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood. Carry them over with you and lay them down in the place where you camp tonight." Then Joshua summoned the 12 men from the Israelites whom he had appointed, one from each tribe. Joshua said to them, "Pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan, and each of you take up a stone on his shoulder, for one for each of the tribes of the Israelites, so that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time to come, 'What do those stones mean to you?' then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off in front of the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, so these stones shall be to the Israelites a memorial forever." The Israelites did as Joshua commanded. They took up the 12 stones out of the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord told Joshua, carried them over with them to the place where they had encamped, and laid them down there. Now, where does the story take place? What's the location? At the Jordan River, at a place near Gilgal. And they take these 12 stones and they set them up as a memorial to their crossing into the Promised Land. And what's the next major event that we get in the book of Joshua? Jericho. And what do they do to Jericho? Okay, the walls come tumbling down, right? That's the story. So that's the very next event that we see in the book of Joshua. So, now let's look at this part of the book of Judges, which is often called the Moabite cycle, right? All of these cycles or turns of this formula, right, of Israel falling into idolatry and then crying out to the Lord, and the Lord raises a judge, are referred to cycles, and they all involve a different enemy. And this one is called the Moabite cycle. And here's the opening scene. The Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord strengthened King Eglon of Moab against Israel because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. In alliance with the Ammonites and the Amalekites, he went and defeated Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms. So the Israelites served King Eglon of Moab for 18 years. What is the city of palms? It's Jericho. All right. Just something to be thinking about. And it then says, here's a map. And I want to just talk for a moment about what's going on behind the scenes that makes this important. So, here we have the map of sort of the general area. That's the Dead Sea right in the middle there. You can see that very dark line that runs down the middle. The Jordan River flows into the top of the Dead Sea there. That dark area is what's called the Rift Valley. The Sea of it runs all the way almost up to Europe and all the way down to Africa. As a matter of fact, it's where two fault lines have sort of pulled apart. And the Sea of Galilee is about 400 feet below sea level at the northern end of the area of Israel. The Dead Sea is below. The Dead Sea is 2,700 feet below sea level, and the Jordan River goes between them. And you see there on the eastern side, right, you see the highway that runs along the coastal plain, along the Mediterranean. You see also running through Moab and Ammon on the right-hand side, you see the what's called the King's Highway, or the Desert Highway. And if you look a little closer, you see Gilgal and Jericho, and I've also put Jerusalem, Gibeah, and Bethel on the map there so you can see. Jerusalem, Gibeah, and Bethel sit on what's called a ridge road that runs along the top of the highlands. Sometimes it's called the Patriarchal Ridge Road because a lot of the book of Genesis happens along that ridge line as they move back and forth. But I want you to see that Jericho sits at a point that controls any access going east and west. Okay? The only way you can get from the highlands, or to get from Jericho west over the highlands, is to go over certain passes, certain ridge lines that make travel easy. And those small red lines there depict those major passes that travel would take. And just to give you an idea of the elevation change, I used my Bible software Accordance to do a little 3D map, and here's kind of an image that shows, you can see how far down Jericho is from that ridge line. And one of the interesting things about the entire area of Benjamin is that Benjamin sits in sort of a low point in those Judah highlands. So if you're going to cross from east to west, to go from the King's Highway or the Desert Highway over to the Coastal Highway, the easiest point of crossing happens to fit through the area that's allotted to Benjamin. And as such, it is often called the Benjamin Saddle. Okay, because the hills, if you go south, the hills kind of raise up. If you go to the north, the hills kind of raise up. You can see the hills to the north in that video, or in that image, are higher than where they are in Benjamin. That's Ephraim, that area up there. So you get this sort of a saddle in the area of Benjamin, which is why we see quite a bit of things also happening in the area of Benjamin, because it's a trade route that goes from east to west. So, Eglon has taken economic control of Israel by taking Jericho. It's a central point for the trade. Israel is confined to the highlands. And so because Moab controls Israel via Jericho, the only way that Israel gets anything out of Moab is to pay tribute, to serve it. So that's the economics going on behind the scenes of their punishment into idolatry, and why it's such a difficult situation. So, then it says, but when the Israelites cried out to the Lord raised up for them a deliverer, Ehud, son of Gera, the Benjaminite, a left-handed man. The Israelites sent a tribute by him to King Eglon of Moab. Ehud made for himself a sword with two edges, a cubit in length, and he fastened it to his right thigh under his clothes. Then he presented the tribute to King Eglon of Moab. Now Eglon was a very fat man. And when Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he sent the people who carried the tribute on their way. A couple things to point out. It's kind of a funny play on words. In Hebrew, Benjamin is Benjamin. Does anyone know what it means? Benjamin means son of the right hand. The son of my right hand. And the way you say left-handed in Hebrew is that he is hindered in his right hand. Okay? Some have argued that perhaps it meant that his right hand was withered. I don't think that's the case. I think it's just that's how you say left-handed in Hebrew, that he was hindered or obstructed with his right hand, therefore he is left-handed. So, a person from the tribe of the right hand is left-handed. Interestingly, within the book of Judges, there seems to be a predisposition of Benjaminites being left-handed. We're going to see this later in the story, and it will say that the Benjaminites were masters of a sling, and that they could basically, I can't remember what the exact phrase is, but it's almost the effect of they could knock the eyeballs out of a crow at 100 yards with their left hand. Okay, I think it's actually you cut a hair or something like that, but they are accurate with a sling in their left hand, not their right hand. So there seems to be sort of a predisposition to left-handedness among Benjaminites, which is ironic because they're the sons of the right hand. Now, Eglon was a very fat man. Anybody know what Eglon means? It means calf. Eglon is the fattened calf. So already the story is setting you up for what happens to fattened calves. They get slaughtered, right? Okay? So the story's already previewing something not good is going to happen to Eglon. So, yes, sir. Okay. Which raises an interesting question. Is fat a positive or a negative description?
According to the situation.
Being fat is positive. It's probably positive. To be fat means you're eating good. Seems to be a positive description. It's not, let me put it this way. It is not necessarily a negative, it does not necessarily have a negative connotation as we might give it a connotation. But it also has to do, because when you're sacrificing the fatted calf, it's the best, right? It's not that you're not giving the old skinny cow, you're giving the nice fat one, the nice healthy one. Okay? Yes, sir.
Well, even the portions of the sacrifice that were commanded in the law was fat portions.
The fat portions, yeah. Yeah, the fat, exactly.
You do know that a cubit, about fingertip to elbow, sword fit and disappeared in him. That tells you a little bit about his width there.
Well, yeah. Yeah, it gives you some measure. Yeah, and how big is a cubit is a matter of great debate. There's not just one single cubit. There's what's called the royal cubit, and there's the standard or the short cubit. A royal cubit is about 22 inches, roughly, 18 to 22. This might be 14 inches, 14 to 18 inches, possibly. We don't know exactly. It's kind of a general measurement, but he doesn't have a big long sword. He's got a fairly short blade.
He had to be able to hide it too.
Yeah, and incidentally, where does he hide it? Yeah, and that word for thigh is also, it can mean a lot of things. It can mean the inner thigh, it can mean the genitals, it can mean a lot of things. But basically he's got it hidden, and he puts it on his right side, presuming that when he's searched, if he is searched, they're going to be looking for something on his left side, because if you're right-handed, you draw from your left side. Okay? Being left-handed, he's going to draw from the other side. So
does that mean when he presented the tribute, did he get with his right hand?
Hold on a minute, because the question is, this tribute, we'll see in a minute, that this tribute is not small. Because it says, but he himself turned back at the sculptured stones near Gilgal and said, I have a secret message for the king. And I think that he said this before. Yeah, so he sent the people who carried the tribute on their way. So he's accompanied by a number of Israelites, okay, that are bringing this tribute, and he sends them back. But it then says, as I say, but he himself turned back at the sculptured stones near Gilgal and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. So the king said, silence, and all his attendants went out from his presence. Ehud came to him while he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber and said, I have a message from God for you. So he rose from his seat. Then Ehud reached with his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and thrust it into Eglon's belly. The hilt also went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not draw the sword out of his belly. And the the dirt came out. Then Ehud went into the vestibule and closed the doors of the roof chamber on him and locked them. So my question is, what in the world are these sculptured stones? Well, here's what's interesting. Where are they? They're near Gilgal. And this word in Hebrew for stones, or for sculptured stones, the way this is the NRSV that translates it this way. Sculptured stones, the Hebrew word is pesalim. And it's the word used for graven images. So it would appear that these stones are idols. And I think what the author is telling us here with the fact that now in Gilgal we have idols and not 12 stones is that the stones have been replaced or they've been minimized based on these idols. The promised land has been polluted with foreign idols. He doesn't say he passed through the 12 stones. He says he passes through the pesalim. All right, the pesalim he turns back. Okay? The promised land has been polluted with foreign idols. At the same place where the Israelites set up 12 unsculptured stones as a memorial. And then we get this weird sort of phrase at the end. Okay, the blade goes in, the hilt goes in, the fat covers it all, and then it says, and the dirt came out, and then it says Ehud went into the vestibule, closed the doors of the roof chamber on him, and locked them. And so my question is, what in the world is happening here?
This translation translates to the dirt feces.
Okay. So it takes the word there and assumes it means feces. Okay. Greg, were you about to say something?
Yeah. Translation of it is he emptied his bowels.
He emptied his bowels. Okay. All right. What's going on here? There's some interesting stuff going on that is, when I was reading this again, I read it in Hebrew again this morning just to see. And there's some beauty in the literature going on that the English just doesn't capture. And one thing is, these two words that I've highlighted in yellow, in Hebrew we call them, or in languages we call those hapax legomenon. I've used that word before. And it basically means that what we have here are two instances of words that are only used one time in the Hebrew Bible. And we don't exactly know what they mean. So how do you figure out what they mean? You have to look at context, and you have to look at the story, or you maybe look at other languages that have other words that are similar, because Hebrew is not on an island by itself. It's part of a whole range of Semitic languages. And what this one word, the first word is parshadon, and the other word is misteron. So parshadon and misteron. And the other thing that's happening here is there's a parallelism in the text that we don't see in English. There's actually several parallelisms, but one that I think is really critical to understanding this. So I've decided to interpret this myself based on, there are some Akkadian words that are similar to parshadon and misteron that some scholars have tried to figure out what they mean. And so this idea of feces is one, or his bowels, is one of the ways that they look at describing parshadon, is that's what it's meaning. And it seems to make sense. But then how does misteron fit in? And I think that's what's interesting. So here is my translation, and I've tried to make the parallelism flow out. It says, the hilt also went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not draw the sword out of his belly. And it, the blade, went out the anus, the feces hole. And Ehud went out the sewer, the feces hole, and closed the doors of the roof chamber on him and locked them. And incidentally, the word used there for closing the doors is the same word that's used to describe what happens to the sword going into his belly. So we get a parallelism of verbs. Okay? And in Hebrew, the way that a phrase almost always starts in narrative when it's consecutive action is it's verb, subject, object. And so it literally says, and went out, and it went out, if there's no blade there, the parshadon, the feces hole, and Ehud, and went out Ehud, the misedon, the sword. So you see the parallelism? The sword does one thing, and Ehud takes a parallel action. Randy?
Something just occurred to me, and I'd like your comment on it. In the Middle East, I think it is considered rude, insulting, if you use your left hand, because that is typically reserved for,
Hygiene.
oneself, hygiene. Is there a parallel here?
That's a very good question. Is there a hygiene relationship there? What we don't know how far back that tradition goes. I certainly don't. It goes back a long time. Does it go back all this far? I don't know. I don't know. I'm sure there might be writings that might indicate how far back we know that. I just don't know what they are. But there's certainly something about being left-handed that is generally not considered trustworthy far, far back into the ancient world. What they didn't know is that we're the only people in our right minds, and that we're the creative folks, and all that stuff. But anyway, there may be something there too. But there's definitely a shiftiness to it.
If you had to get out of that room and shut the doors, that would be a way of escape.
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing, is we have this weird word, and so basically what happens is he escapes the room the same way the sword goes through Ehud.
So
Yes, sir.
what do we know about the archaeological physical structure of what a sewer hole might be? I mean, I know that in some medieval days, you'd like hang your rear end out a window, and there's special.
Yeah, there's actually an article, I believe it was written by a gentleman named Baruch Halpern. I think he's at the University of Georgia, where he dug a lot into what the world does this word mean. He wrote about, the actual lock that would have been used on the door and how it makes sense with this. But I believe he even describes what that sewer hole might have looked like. It's interesting, it's also on the upper floor, right? Because in most of the Middle East, especially, assuming this is taking place in Jericho, which is what it seems to be the case, 2,700 feet below sea level is hot. The air is dense, it's oppressive, it's humid, it's hot. So having an upper room gives you some relief. It's cool, any breeze is going to be, you're going to get that breeze. And so he's at least got a place where he can, do it. And the hole's big enough that Ehud can fit down it. Okay? As gross as that is. So, did I hear a question?
A few verses on why the people his servants don't come to find him. What do they say he's doing?
Oh, so what they think he's doing is they think he's using the bathroom. Literally it says they think he's covering his feet. That's how you say, you're taking your robe and you drop it around your ankles. And so his feet are covered. So, that's the euphemism that happens. But so Ehud and the sword exit the scene similarly. Now,
So is this artistic poetry?
so that's a good question. There is definitely some artistic imagery in the literature here, for sure. Okay? And I guess my question is, does this imagery change your impression of Ehud? Especially if you think he's this stealth ninja assassin, right, that sneaks in, does the deed, swings into the vestibule, sneaks out by the guards, and goes down the wall or something, right? It's a little different than that. It's a little different. And I think there's a reason for it. Let's go on. So it says, after he had gone, the servants came, and they saw that the doors of the roof chamber were locked. They thought he must be relieving himself in the cool chamber. So they waited until they were embarrassed. And when he still did not open the doors of the roof chamber, they took the key and opened them. And there was their Lord, lying dead on the floor. A couple things. So, I've said relieving himself. He was covering his feet. We see that in other places. When Saul goes into the cave to use the restroom, and David and all his men are at the back, and it says that Saul covered his feet. Okay, it's how you relieve yourself. And it says, so they waited. And I found this word, the word used here is a funny word. Waiting is not the word that it's not the way I would translate that word. If I were just reading along naturally, I would not say, oh, that's the word for waiting. I might think of someone stood, okay, or that they were silent. That's what waiting. There's no specific word that says wait in Hebrew, but there's other ways to say it. But the word that's used here is the word that is more often used for someone that has been injured and is writhing in pain, is uncomfortable, or is in the travails of childbirth. So the imagery seems to be that they're standing around. Where is he? What's going on? There's an uncomfortableness to their waiting. There's an uncomfortableness to their waiting. And finally they get so embarrassed by it, they're like, well, we just got to go up and see. And then they find now, they probably think he's relieving himself. Why?
He's locked the bathroom door.
Well, he's locked the door to the upper chamber where he was, and the smells are probably not being held back by the door. So, it says, Ehud escaped while they delayed and passed beyond the sculptured stones. Here we have those stones again, Pesalim, and escaped to Sirah. And when he arrived, he sounded the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went down with him from the hill country, having him at their head. He said, follow after me, for the Lord has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. So they went down after him and seized the fords of the Jordan against the Moabites and allowed no one to cross over. At that time they killed about 10,000 Moabites, all strong, able-bodied men. No one escaped. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest 80 years. So we see the sculptured stones. And it's where is Ehud from? What's his tribe? Benjamin. Who does he go to? Why?
Benjamin didn't want to interfere with the trade.
Possibly. Ephraim is also the stronger tribe. Ephraim is the bigger tribe. They're also impacted because they're right on the edge of Benjamin. So he goes up. It may also be that Moabites might have been expecting him to go back up to Benjamin, so he takes another route up to Ephraim. That's also possible. And so he sounds the trumpet. Interestingly, the verb for sound the trumpet, I believe, is the same verb for what he does to put the sword in. Okay, they share that same meaning. Sound the trumpet and to stick are the same verb. Again, parallelism in the text. And I want to focus finally on all strong, able-bodied men, describing the Moabites. I have a problem with this interpretation. And I'm not the only one. The word used for strong is kelev, which means fat. And the word used for able-bodied men can mean mighty, but it also has the sense of being full. And so I think probably a better translation is, at that time, they killed 10 ex-men of the Moabites, all fat men of substance. No one escaped. I'm not saying the first translation is wrong. I'm saying there's another way to read this that I think fits the context better. Fat men of substance. Yes, ma'am.
So therefore, they killed the people that were rich and the ones who were powerful and had probably substantial servants and what about them, and therefore they took the leaders of that area.
That's
out.
certainly a possibility. Yeah. So what are the implications for these oppressors? This is what I think gets hidden in the story. Eglon's a fat calf, and the troops are fat men of substance. If you recall from the very first line, one of the very first lines of this story, it says, Yahweh strengthened Moab. Moab is not a formidable enemy unless Yahweh strengthens them. And so when Yahweh raises up a deliverer, and the Lord raises up a deliverer to go against them, he has withdrawn his strength from Moab, and they're left with a fat king and an unfit fat army. Now, this raises questions about Israel's condition too, okay? The 12 stones of Gilgal have been replaced by idols, by graven images. And we see that Ehud gets as soiled as Eglon on his way out, right? Which is kind of a metaphor for what's happened to Israel by worshiping idols. And you've got to wonder also that if Moab was so inept, did Eglon really need to go to such lengths Ehud have to go to such lengths to kill Eglon? It makes for a good story. Okay, it makes for some good potty humor, even though we don't teach our kids the potty humor, right? Although they eat it up. But there's a messiness to Ehud's deliverance. It's not clean. It's messy. And again, I think what that's showing is that when you make economic decisions, there are theological consequences that get messy. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest 80 years. What's the significance of 80 years of peaceful, quiet rest?
2 generations.
Okay. 80 is 2 times 40. And 40 is symbolic of a generation. It doesn't mean it was exactly 80 years. It means it's 2 generations of rest. A long period of rest. Okay? Pay attention to these numbers because as we go through the stories, we're going to see them start to get less and less and less. So, Yahweh strengthens a weak oppressor. Moab. A fat calf king and a fat army. Promised land has been polluted by foreign idols. Ehud, a left-handed son of the right hand, saves them. But that deliverance is messy. And he exits the palace like the blade exits Eglon, down the chute. And as we're going to see time and again, the economic decisions that Israel makes have theological consequences that are going to continue to get worse and worse. So for next week, we're going to look at maybe my favorite judge, maybe tied to my favorite judge, story of Deborah. And we can't talk about Deborah without talking about Yael, the real hero of the story. And so I'd like you to read Judges chapter 4. It's 24 verses long. Consider who the enemy is that gets raised up. In which city does that enemy reside? And see if you can find this city in the book of Joshua. And how long does the land have peaceful rest? And we're going to spend probably 2, maybe 3 weeks on Deborah because this story is told twice. We get it once in narrative, and then after the narrative's done, we get a musical number, and it's told in song. And so we're going to compare and contrast the two and what they might tell us about what's going on. Thank you all very much, and look forward to seeing you all next week.